Welcome everyone, our audience. We are again with you with Don't Give Up Ukraine, and this is our 13th week already. That also means, and I keep reminding you that in Ukraine there's a war going on for already 13 weeks, and we will be there. We don't give up Ukraine as long as the war lasts. Of course, we hope that that won't be very long, but being realistically, will we be here sometime yet? That gives us also the opportunity to discuss all kinds of things relating to the war in Ukraine in these hour, 1 hour in the week, and we decided for the coming weeks to change our view a bit, like think in the direction of poetry, of literature, of Ukrainian literature as a specific lens on Ukraine as a nation, on the war, and probably all other things what can be relevant, like the difference between Ukrainian literature and Russian literature, for instance, which is a very hot topic, I think, here in the Netherlands. Anyway, so I'm very proud that we have here Iryna Starovoyt, and Iryna, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for me having to. It's a great pleasure. So could you say something about yourself? Who is Iryna Starovoyt?
Well, I'm Lvivian. I have been born, raised up, and live in the same city for all my life, which is almost 47 years. So proudly, I call myself Ukrainian. I am of a university professor's family, so I have been raised up in an apartment full of books, and I had very big interest in languages since very early. I then decided to become a literary scholar, and I graduated from Lviv University. I defended my dissertation on postmodernism in Ukrainian literature and critics. And later on, I moved into the direction of cultural memory studies and to cultural studies as such. And for last more than 10 years, I believe, I teach all kind of cultural studies research and theoretical topics at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv.
Yesterday, you said you were just coming back to Lviv from Slovenia, right? From a PEN conference?
Yeah, that's true. It's less than a week, because it's only the night, like the Tuesday early morning, let's say, that I have come back. And I have been there for the International Annual Congress of PEN, International PEN Peace Committee. And I'm very pleased to become a voice for Ukraine for a couple of days in this European country, and for the international community, which was gathered there virtually and really.
And how was the Ukrainian cause received at the PEN conference?
Well, the Ukraine topic was quite central, also because this particular committee, which exists for 54 years already, and is concerned with the issues of European responsibility for the peace in the world, it was already coming as a shock for them that the long and dragged war on Ukrainian eastern border rapidly came full-fledged and total war of destruction and many war crimes. So, of course, the first weeks after February 24, they're very hard on people which thought of themselves that they understood certain things on European continent and more or less tried to catch up with the dynamics of Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And actually, it all just spilled out of control. And there are many questions, of course, and there are many suspicions, because situation seems also too black and white. And we all know that people who tend to think critically, to tend to think with a great portion of inquiry into subject. They really can't understand, is it possible that something like this is happening on European ground in 21st century?
Yeah, and is it possible that there is really something that is black and white, and not gray, in a sense? This is I think this is in that sense also a shock for all, more or less. So that we have to adjust to this reality. What we, at least for me, when I was concerned, I think it was possible, but it wouldn't happen. That was more like my view just before 24th or 20th of February. After the 20s, I became very uneasy that it could happen. Yeah.
Of course, we should not understand or try hard to somehow get into Putin's mind, but we all understand that his calculus actually is quite anti-Russian as well, because this war is taking its toll physically and materially on Ukrainians, but mentally and in terms of identity on Russians.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And if I may go back to you as a writer, so when did you actually start writing poetry and literature?
Yeah, I believe that many of us tend to start write quite early. So like a young teenager, I was already writing, scribing something on paper, and later on my first laptop. But it's true that probably since being 16 years old, I already thought of myself as a poet. And in many ways also I was interested in thinking muse, in the muse which is not only about vague inspiration and trying to get some articulated expression of feelings, but I also was interested in something which could be called intellectual feelings, when your thinking and your feeling somehow get into cross with each other, or sometimes complement each other and work together. So I published my first book when I was 22, and it was noticed. I got some acclamation for it, and was accepted to the Writers' Union of Ukraine. And after that, I went into university professor career path. I was more into administrative work. I was for quite a long period head of the newly established MA in Cultural Studies at Lviv University. But after a certain time, I understood that part of me is an academician, but part of me still is a poet. And I was wrestling with this feeling, but I came back to literature somewhere at about 2012, 2013. And then I published my new book, and it got translation into English. So now I'm
talking about this one.
Yeah, I'm showing you this one, which is of 2017, called A Field of Foundlings, and it was translated by Grace Mahoney, an inspiring translator for Grace. That was just her first book of translation, but since then she made a very good job establishing the whole Ukrainian series at a small American independent press, which is called Lost Horse Press. Yes. And now I believe the series counts at about 10 titles and will be expanded.
Yes, it's a very nice series if you look at it at Lost Horse Press. And you were the first one, eh? So that's something special, I think.
Yeah. Christine Holbert-Crook was our big discovery, because we were looking for somebody to publish the manuscript, and that was not that easy. And Christine herself was a well-established publisher of American poetry and also some poetry in translation. And she asked herself, why not to start with Ukrainian line?
Yeah. So we're going to talk about your book, and you're going to read some poems to us later. But first, our traditional question in Don't Give Up Ukraine is how is this week in Ukraine? So how would you say as a, well, maybe just not especially as a poet, but as someone who is there, how is the week today?
Every week now is longer than a week in Ukraine. The events are dense, and I believe everybody of us is glued to the screen of his or her cell phone or laptop, because we want to check the news almost every hour, sometimes even more often, especially if we expect some bad or good news to happen at last. And I believe that last week was more or less under the star of Mariupol, and we were close tracing the fate of the heroic defenders of Mariupol, which were under the siege, and for which so many powerful people and ordinary people across the globe were trying to gather support and energy to rescue them. And probably you know that this last Saturday, Ukrainian singer Kalush Orchestra had one European song competition called Eurovision. And of course, there was a kind of humanitarian aspect of that, Oleg Psyuk, the frontman, called the world to support and to save people in Azovstal, people who were under the siege there. And the next 24 hours brought a very good news for them and for us all. And I believe that we can at least now have a hint of hope that these military women and men will be saved, that they will get some medical treatment, and they now probably will be in the status of prisoners of war on the Russian side at the Independent Republic of Donetsk. But I believe that their fate now is closer to life, and a couple of days before it was closer to death.
Yes, I agree with you. This was what was so good about the winning of the Eurovision Song Contest. It was that you won by popular vote, not by jury, but by popular vote. That meant basically that you were supported, that the band was supported by regular men and women who are watching the telly and say, okay, we support Ukraine because this is important now.
There is such an ironic formula that probably Eurovision is watched by teenagers and family wives and housekeepers. But even if it is really the case, and the sociology behind the auditorium is exactly that, then actually we see how the cause of Ukraine is penetrating every home, every a small community, and across European society now, there are no more questions where Ukraine is, who Ukrainians are, and what they stand for. And I also observe there is a complementary line in the previous slogan. The previous slogan, which was very important for us, was stand with Ukraine, right? But now stand with Ukraine until the win. And I believe, this is an important improvement.
Yeah, I think so too. So you mentioned already the Azov and the Azov battalion, or that's again the wrong word today, I would say. When we read about the Azov in Dutch press, and not only the Dutch press, actually, that's always something like the notorious Azov, and the and a reference to some Nazi relationship between Azov and the guys who are and the women who are fighting there, and you just call them heroic, and I would agree with that. But could you comment on this, on the way we've seen it?
As far as I understand, there was quite a big dynamics behind what this battalion Azov was and is. It was formed back in 2014 in the days after the Maidan revolution and after the moment when on the peak of winning of Ukrainian revolution, Putin decided to invade and annex Crimea, and then decided to go even further and start the war on the eastern Ukrainian border in the area of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. And at that very time, young people in Kiev, who were standing on Maidan, but representing probably the right-wing Ukrainian nationalists, they formed the volunteering battalion. And that battalion was comprised of young men with quite right-wing worldview and attitudes, as much as I understand. Mm-hmm. There were researchers who were looking into this subject, and I believe that it's interesting that they themselves changed their opinion and corrected their own research subject. Within the last 8 years, this volunteering battalion has been transformed into the part of regular National Guard of Ukraine. So at certain point, it was adopted into the system, which of course was absolutely, for which of course it was absolutely unacceptable to have any right-wing elements in it, or people who would be sympathetic to fascist or more than that, Nazi ideas. So there was a revision, self-revision for some and revision for others to leave battalion if they persist in their attitudes. And as we know now, Battalion Azov comprise with people of for whom Russia is probably the background country. Ethnically, many of them could be Russians. For majority of them, Russian is their home language, their native language, their first language, as I would say, and they now are much more politically Ukrainian than ethnically Ukrainian, or more than that, right-wing Ukrainians. And I believe Western observers were not on par with all this story and all this dynamics. And I would like to draw your attention that while international scholars and investigative journalists we're looking for right-wing elements within Ukrainian army or Ukrainian society, they actually overlooked big swaths of Russian society turning fascist. So I believe that the agenda in itself was a little bit misleading, because proportionally the worldview of right-wing stance, it never has been represented in our parliament. And within last 2 elections to the parliament, only less than 1% people who were supporting the right-wing agenda, they could gather less than 1% of vote. And this is nothing. And of course, they just not enter the parliament when they have such a result. So if you compare this to the situation in the recent elections in France, in Germany, probably in Poland even, you will see that right-wing agenda is much more applicable to some Central European and Western European countries right now than to Ukraine. And we have justification, or at least part of the justification, to have some nationalists, because we are a country at war for more than 8 years already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for explaining this. I think this is important to share this story with not so many people who are not that well informed about Azov or about the development in Ukraine. You could even say that, as you just explained, that the internal changes in Azov and reflects more or less that the development in Ukraine itself, what became even more by year more Ukrainian. Yeah.
I believe we also have to take into account a very important moment in contemporary Ukrainian society, that society is complex and has many historical backgrounds and many historical phases. And first of all, it is important to say that there are people who are Orthodox Christians and Greek Catholic Christians, as I am in the western part and central part of Ukraine. But on the top of this difference between denominations of Christians, there are also Christians of Moscow Patriarchate, which even make the whole thing more complex. And of course, there are Muslims. And Ukraine, which has this big community of Crimean Tatars, proportionally, it is not big. But if you think about the suffering from the war, Crimean Tatars were expelled, were squeezed, were almost deported from Crimea for the second time within less than 80 years. The first deportation was made by Stalin in 1944, and this cruelty has happened exactly like May 18, we now in May 19, so yesterday was the day when we in Ukraine commemorate Surgun, this deportation of Crimean Tatars, the trauma of it, and the fight of Crimean Tatar people for their own rights to return to their homeland. And they did what they could as early as in 1989, since Gorbachev and his administration allowed them to return. Before that, it was illegal. And just imagine that there is a people inside Ukrainian nation which has been deprived from the right to their homeland and to their home for 2 generations. And they have preserved their language, their culture, their tradition, their craftsmanship, and first of all, their faith. And as soon as it started to be possible, family by family, neighborhood by neighborhood, they returned. They returned to the same locality or to the very similar locality, like those who were situated in mountain Crimea, they returned to mountains. Those who were on the seashore, they returned to the seashore. Those who were in Midland, they returned somewhere into the Midland. And they were not welcomed there. They were new locals. They were new Crimeans of Russian and Ukrainian background, and there was tension behind all this big coming back home to Crimea. And it took more than 20 years for them to settle, to rebuild their homes, to restart their lives, very often from the scratches. And just when they did it, as the grandfather of one of my friends said, we just planted again our wine grapes, and we planted again our gardens, and they started to bring fruits. And you want us now just to go away again? So there are so many levels of trauma and so many levels of transgenerational suffering. Ukrainians, because of that, are, I believe, very empathetic people. We understand, we hear the story of Crimean Tatars, and we immediately connect this to Ukrainian suffering in the 20th century, during all kinds of tragedies related to Stalin and Hitler, and then also to repressions done by Brezhnev. So we know all this system. This is because in Ukraine, it's rarely that you can see prevailing Soviet nostalgia. And it's quite the opposite in the contemporary Russian Federation. Soviet nostalgia was at its high, was at its peak. And it's interesting that they even implanted this nostalgia to the generation which was generation of independence when Russian Federation was already not part of the Soviet Union. These people born after the dissolution of Soviet Union are sometimes more nostalgic about the Union than those who actually went through this experience, because the experience was not only sweet, and for some it was bittersweet, and for some it was just drastic and catastrophic.
Brings me to my more like to your work as a poet. Did the war, and the wars were complicated because when did this war start? Was it 2014, or is it 2022 or February 24? Did it somehow affect you as a poet? What would you say? Or is it more like, I've always been thinking about Ukraine in this struggle to become on its own feet and to some of you and to listen to what happened there.
Maybe it's time just to read some poems, and then I will tell you the years when they actually appeared. And by some numbers you will be surprised.
Okay,
let's try.
Try.
You will allow me to read one piece in Ukrainian and then in translation, and the rest I will do in translation.
I will love that.
Ця земля 1000 років тримала небо грушами куполів, дзвіницями, ярмолками синагог, мінаретами мечетей. Щодо українізації, це не так, як ти думаєш. Це щось вкрай особисте і стається не з кожним. Просто одного ранку у Києві Інгігерда каже на себе Ірина, Кирило скаже на себе Кирило, а Серго називає себе Сергієм. Мова, про яку спершу наказували, що така не існує. Згодом подейкували, що вона вродилася глухонімою селючкою, тому з нею можна все. Вона ж не посвідчить в судах, та йде ті суди. А для міжнародного трибунала нужен геноцид і все таке прочее, а геноцида-то нет. Бачиш, наші війни не бувають триденними, а люди не такі вже й двожильні. Нам не треба приймати закони про право на забуття. Навпаки, нам за пекло слід пам'ятати насамперед про майбутнє. Я біженка, я біжу, як кров по своїй землі. Не можу втекти, але можу витекти вся, бо де мій пакет із салоксом. І тоді залишаться тільки побиті горшки, як з трипілля, тільки терикони зі шлаку і сліз, як з Донбасу. Це навіть ліпше, що ти не знаєш, що робити в таких випадках, бо ті, хто знали, тільки казали, що знають. Врятуй мене. На цій землі з грушами куполів, дзвіницями, ярмолками синагог, мінаретами уже стількох не врятовано назавжди. Ти зможеш, я знаю. Просто впізнай у мені себе. Говори мене мовами. Зализуй мене язиком. Now in translation by Grace Mahoney. For 1,000 years this land supported heaven with the pairs of domes, with belfries, with the yarmulkes of synagogues, with the minarets of mosques. And then Ukrainization. It's not quite what you think. It's something rather personal and doesn't happen with everyone. Simply one morning in Kiev, Inhiherda says to herself, Irina. Kyrillos calls himself Kirillo, and Sergo, Serhiy. They decreed that the language didn't really exist in the first place. After that, it was rumored that the language herself was born as a deaf bumpkin. As such, you can do anything to her and she can't sue. There are no courts, because for the International Tribunal we need genocide and all such things, but there is no genocide. You see, our wars don't happen in 3 days, and people don't have 2 lives. We don't need the legislation of amnesia. On the contrary, we remember with tenacity, especially for the future. I am a refugee. I run like blood across my land. I can't get away, but I can spill it all. Where's my packet of saloks? All that remains are just the shattered ports of our neighbors, like from Tripilla, just heaps of slag and tears, like from Donbass. It's even better that you don't know what to do in such cases, because those who knew only said that they knew. Save me. In this land, with the pairs of domes, with belfries, with the yarmulkes of synagogues, with minarets, already so many are lost forever. You can, I know. Simply see yourself in me. Say me in languages. Use your tongue. Salve my wound.
Well, I have to applaud you, Iryna. I read your poems, but they are even much better when you read them to me. And the Ukrainian really, I didn't understand a word, but it really touched my heart.
Well, all our subjects are entangled, and sometimes they are transgenerational, as I already told you. That's why allow me to read 2 more poems, and then we talk again. When I was still young, I was put into line and asked, who's to blame? What's to be done? Kiss and cry, answered the round-headed girl who resembled me, a bruised knee, shaved head, bald as Buddha in the lousy kindergarten. Ah, good girl, approving smiles from aunts and uncles in black and white photos, unfamiliar aunts, immensely feminine, which I will never be, with the scent of lovage in their hair, who grew old under-kissed. Not my uncles, with grey bristles and a devil in their ribs, they laughed in the smoke of a good pipe, unmourned. And only the round-headed neighbor boy, with his knee bruised on the ice rink of time, limps with compassionate tears, take me by the shoulder, and whispers earnestly, kiss and cry. Well, tell me what you have never told anybody. Don't be afraid. I'm not just anybody. The work of love is to wait. Not because the rest is a hobby for her, but because nobody but love will do it professionally. Yes, she has trained for this. She has an internship and PhD in waiting, and a service record longer than some tongues. 300 times they told her that one can't win bread from waiting, that there are better offers, and it's time to spit and post her resume somewhere on work.ua, and not to wait blindly, by heart, with automatic movement and the third eye, to wait fast and slow, until the 25th frame of the film, until the 25th hour of the day, to wait, crossing all the limits of humanity, to wait, not believing your own eyes. So when the light dims and we go out one by one, each from a different cinema life, wait, love scrolls as if on touch screen. Wait, this is not the end.
Oh, thank you. So you said something about time. So when they were written. So could you say something about it?
The last 2 were written back in the middle 2000s. So it was long ago, before the conflict between Russia and Ukraine would go open and crack. But I believe that something like memory wars was already there. And I believe that the big quarrel was about the heritage and meaning of the Second World War and of the big victory over Nazis. Ukrainians knew that the whole war actually was taken shape and speed on their own ground. And the terrible things happened, unbelievable and unimaginable things happened. Ukraine suffered not only as Ukraine, but also as great and in certain ways immense Jewish community, which was part of Ukrainian land and part of Ukrainian traditional way of lives for many, many centuries, probably as long as Kiev Rus actually existed, so more than 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was done in that way that even Western imagination somehow could not entirely understand it or imagine it, because it was not Holocaust by terror camps and gas chambers, but Holocaust done at pits by bullets. And it means that actually neighbors were seeing execution of neighbors. It means also that some people were trying to rescue some other people, but not many succeeded because there was a death sentence for rescuing your Jewish neighbor. It means that some property has been left. Of course, the most valuable thing were seized by German soldiers and officers, but some other things actually remained. And it means that neighbors somehow got into these houses and domiciles, and they did things there and probably decided to seize some other's property. And there was a lot of black consciousness, a lot of dark memory, which was never actually talked about, which was never worked with as post-traumatic memory. But even before that, 10 years earlier or 9 years earlier, there were also absolutely unimaginable and dehumanizing things happening on Ukrainian ground, and we now call them Holodomor. It was a situation, in which the most fertile soil on European territory, where local population was famous as agricultural tribe or some other many tribes, who then united into political nations, which is called Ukrainian. They were always known as a breadbasket of Europe. And just imagine that, particularly at the pinnacle of Stalin repressions of 1932-33, all food, not only grain, but all food was seized from peasants who were objecting collectivization. It means that their traditional way of life was on the brink of being crushed by the Soviet system, and they were pushed to some other way of doing their agricultural businesses and uniting into these forced collective farms. So we know that collectivization was taking place gradually, and it take more than 3 years to eliminate most important leaders of opposition to this movement. But those who left and those who actually were almost subjected to these collective farms still were punished with this huge wave of man-made famine. The villages were seized, not family could approach its own genealogically related relatives and help them or rescue them, and people were starving, and then they started to swallow from hunger, then they started to lose their mind from hunger, then they were starting to see how their relatives are dying in big suffering, and then they were prone to cannibalism in many places. So when you think something like this is happening in the 20th century, you also have shivers on your body. So Ukrainians, but not only Ukrainians, but also other nations who resided in Ukrainian villages. It means these could be Swedes, these could be Bulgarians, this could be Greeks, but also Jews. They all were prone to this atrocity, and those who survived had this very dark memory. From one side, it's important to be the heir of those who survived. It means that they are smart enough, they found some surviving strategies, and so on. But from the other side, it means that they also conformed, and probably they were broken, spine broken and mentally broken. That's why this is such a tragic and such a immense memory of suffering, which penetrates Ukrainians in couple of generations. And nobody actually was celebrating Stalin, even if in Russia it is said that Stalin was effective manager and that he actually won as a strategist, as a generalissimus, that he won the Second World War, which they called Great Patriotic War. But at the very peak of Nazi invasion, less than 4% of Russian Federation was occupied, but 100% of Ukrainian Soviet Republic was occupied, and Crimea was occupied. So from one side, we suffered in all possible ways, and we know exactly that after the Jews, the Slavs were also prone to extinction, or almost total extinction. So it was just a matter of time and sequence, but not some better prospects for Ukrainians on the Nazi-occupied territories, not at all. It was a colonial war. It wanted to establish this land empire. And Stalin actually also was treated the Ukrainian grounds as a colony, not as an integral part of, let's say, Russian nation and Russian future. So the resources should be extracted from here. And the human resources were treated exactly as resources, as carbohydrates or something like that. So because of that, I believe Ukrainians had very many dimensions of dehumanization, to which they were exposed as victims. And from here, probably there is this floor of self-victimization in Ukrainian historical narrative. But at the same time, it is important to understand that every third man fighting in the Red Army against Nazis was Ukrainian. And every fifth man who died fighting Nazis was Ukrainian. So big portion of this big victory actually belongs to Ukrainians as well as to Russians, Belarusians, Georgians, Crimean Tatars, and other nations within the Soviet Union. Sometimes they were far, far away in Siberia, in the far north and far east. But Ukrainians never thought of this victory in any triumphant way. It was always understood as tragic, as most catastrophic experience after the Holodomor happened. And about Holodomor you could not speak, and about the Second World War, at least to a certain extent, you could speak. And it was going under one cover, joint suffering of Soviet people. So never it was attributed separately that there was a Jewish suffering, there was Ukrainian suffering, there was Crimean Tatar suffering. But still everybody could somehow relate and could mourn about this. So this very important work of mourning, especially of those who were unmourned, or who died with no proper funeral, or who never get enough respect for their suffering, and absolutely unnecessary suffering and unprovoked suffering, right? So this was something which was deeply in the family memory of Ukrainians. And even if some families were, let's say, better off during the Soviet time, and they were part of communist nomenclatura, it's almost necessarily that there was story of one or two brothers or one or two and aunts or uncles who were on the wrong side of history, wrong side from the official Soviet point of view. And because of that, the story was more complex, the story was more multi-layered, and the story had some intrigue in it, which was gradually opening to the children when they were growing and becoming more adult. Or if the transmission of memory was not possible between the first and second generation, then there was a transmission between grandparents and grandchildren's. So because of that, the complexity and the dark side of the 20th century was well known in Ukrainian society by 1980s. Nobody was fooled by Soviet propaganda. Nobody was fooled by Soviet utopia. This was utopia, which was diminishing human dignity and never observed human rights. Nevertheless, Soviet Union signed the famous Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And another side of this big story, of course, was the explosion of Chernobyl reactor in 1986. For Ukrainians, three things started to be obvious. First, that Russian power was behaving as imperial power because they put this reactor not 100 kilometers away from Moscow or Leningrad, but they put it 100 kilometers away from Kiev. Secondly, when the explosion actually has taken place, then it was discovered that there was certain experiment, some test going on in the nuclear reactor area. So they were trying to put the reactor on the bigger pressure and see what will happen. So actually, again, it was a man-made catastrophe on the ground of Ukrainian Soviet Republic. And the third, this is how Moscow power actually behaved. For more than 10 days, they secreted the information what's going on. They didn't understood probably that nuclear pollution knows no borders and no political maps. So actually the pollution went north up to Sweden and Norway, but it also went west to Germany and France and Spain. And of course it went up north to Belarus, and it goes down Dnieper River to all the swaths of Ukrainian land. And the consequences of the nuclear catastrophe, they were not known yet, because it was quite a unique situation. It was first in the human history that something like that actually happened. Uncontrolled explosion on the nuclear reactor, which is still in power. And I believe that then Ukrainians felt absolutely abandoned by Moscow. So-called parade on May 1, so just 5 days after the explosion on the nuclear reactor, has been held. And we know now that President Gorbachev told to Ukrainian top communist leader Shcherbetsky that if parade would be cancelled, he himself, Shcherbetsky himself, should put his communist party, how would you call it, this legitimation on the table. So somebody who is the top communist in the Ukrainian Soviet Republic for many years, who is the leader of the republic, will be just cancelled and thrown away. So Shcherbetsky did the parade, but he actually understood later that that was the day when the nuclear pollution, the level of nuclear pollution in Kiev was the highest, probably yes, after all days of the explosion. So they made again an atrocity, and not only you have to take into account heroism of those firefighters and Kievans who first entered the ground and who did everything in their power and in their capability to stop the nuclear reaction to evolve, and they actually prevented the worst thing, yes, because they were another 3 reactors side by side, and the explosion could be multiplied in many, many times, and could probably stop the biological life on the North Hemisphere, or at least on the European continent. So it was stopped by the local heroism of individuals, local heroism of professionals, and we know that now. But the first wave of consequences was thyroid cancer. And thyroid cancer, especially in children, produced a very particular body, the damaged body, which looked very much like the body prone to the very long famine. So the pictures from hospitals of these children in 1987-88, they were resembling the children whom our grandparents saw in their very young childhood. And I believe that was a kind of an explosion of dark memory. And everybody understood, as long as the decision will be made only in Moscow, Ukrainians should not even expect nothing good for themselves. There is no future, there is no security for our children and grandchildren, ecologically, politically, economically, and even physically, if we would not be independent. So independence on the Ukrainian side, it's a very normal and logical thing. And I believe that it has happened in the most elegant way, because it was a real dissolution. Many people expected it will be a catastrophe. Nuclear powers, which would not be able to somehow figure out how to stop being together. But it was a divorce in most legal and calm way. And Ukraine was absolutely sure we are starting our happy ever after. And Russia probably also is starting its own happy ever after. After all, they were not happy to be in the Soviet Union as well. And now it is not remembered enough that Russia was first to proclaim sovereignty against the Soviet Union power back in June 1990. So they were also seeking more autonomy, more self-government, and Yeltsin was at the odds with Gorbachev, because Gorbachev wanted to be the real president of the whole thing, and Yeltsin wanted Russia and Russian Federation to be more independent in its governing and decision making. So now I believe in many heads of contemporary Russians, the whole story of this dissolution of Soviet Union is warped, is distorted, and the historical facts are there. So interpretation comes over the facts, and if they want to understand where actually everything started for this new spiral of violence between us, they actually have to know better their own history. They have to know better the history of the Soviet Union and its dissolution, and they have no better history of Ukraine.
Yeah, so this is quite a background for the two poems, if you are say. So what would you, if you look at these two poems, so you said there's already this war of memory going on, and is these two poems, I'm beginning to understand them better now you're just explaining them, because they are so full of symbolism, which for a simple soul is me hard to grasp, even if I try. But what do you add to this history with these two poems? What would you say?
I believe I'm adding this very personal dimension, and I believe I also take this standpoint or this rancors of family history. And this is something which speaks directly. It speaks from my place to your place if we share a certain experience in the past. And as for Ukrainian readers and for Ukrainian contemporaries, many of my symbolism tricks, they were obvious. It was not so mm, vague or foggy as you probably can think of it. Maybe some things are also a little bit lost in translation, but others are also found in translation. And I'm very thankful, and I bow to my translator in her effort to make sense of what actually I'm saying in this poetical and metaphorical way.
Yeah, it's quite a job. Eh? So this translation also means that you make something reflexive, what in there in the poem, but somewhere hidden, or you adding some meaning to this. So I'm beginning to think about the boy with his round head when you talked about Chernobyl, for instance. I'm not sure if
But
it's a good
it's
connection, but
yeah, it's also a true story that I have been to the Soviet kindergarten, Eli, and because there were laces there, so I have been shaved bald. And for me, in 3 years age or 4 years age, it was quite a drama because girls, they want to have all kind of styly hair, and you come back from the kindergarten and they say, "Oh, we have to." To shave you bald, and there were many tears behind the scene, and somehow this story came further with me, and I understood also that this trivial violence, this everyday portion of violence to which we were all exposed, it was so heavy and it was so loaded on my mother, on my father, and all kind of persecutions, ideological persecutions, surveillance persecutions to which they were prone. So nobody actually have been open in their talkings. And it was also this this thought at the back of your head that somebody, even in the very close circle, could be informant. Somebody could betray you, and it's not easy to be
yeah,
just open-minded, and it's not easy to make friends who will be real friends.
yeah.
But I believe because of that, people also cherished their friendships through lives. And I am very thankful to my parents that they taught me how to make friends and keep them. And
Mhm.
I want to think that I follow their advice.
Yeah. And would you also say that these two poems of your poetry in general is trying to add meaning to this kind of experiences, which are very personal, I think, for you or for others, and then to try to articulate something that you find words for these kind of experience what everybody had, but it's sometimes hard to articulate, especially. I was thinking just a minute ago from what my friend Bogdan Pankiewicz said sometime a couple of years ago. So, Yurik, you have to understand, we Ukrainians came from a culture that we don't say what we think and we will do what we say. And so that was a kind of a life-saving strategy, so to say.
But I would insist that it has changed.
Yeah.
It has changed already in my generation, but it particularly changed in the next generation. That's why I'm proud of our diplomats of today, and I'm proud of our citizens of today, because we call the evil, and we call the war by name. And I
Mhm.
want to just pay attention that Ukrainian poets were probably the first to call
Yes.
this war the real war, and
Yeah.
not to look for all kind of euphemism or possible vague formulation of it. And I also want to pay attention to my poem, which is probably more political and critical towards Europe, but it comes from 2014, and that's why you will recognize why I'm so bitter.
Mhm.
Diplomat boys with ostrich inclinations, you are clueless that someone could be born in a guest chamber and instead of dying, grows like Kotihoroshko to pump and kick the soccer globe of the world. Clueless that one can love from east to west, that one can learn the difference between right and wrong through the little causalities of everyday life, accepting condolences from you and the humanitarian aid of words. clueless that in a single generation, one can transform from something gaseous into fiery water and shale. We, the people, are the energy source. Diplomat boys from countries where the sun sets, now you're all just one diplomat toy. Search for the cure to human madness. Look at us and don't look away. Archive the screenshots of how our boys, domestic as houseplants, suddenly grow to war and become cacti, agave, and then tequila. How our children turn gray, how our cities burn like coal, how the dead fall from the sky, how the living burrow in the earth. The first angel covers his face. How terrifyingly comfortable it is to you on the other side of the screen.
It is bitter. Eh? So when I read it, I didn't know anything about 2000. That it was from 2014, but already then it sounded bitter to me, and I couldn't imagine who you had in mind by that. So, it's also something, say, not only saying we come to maturity, but you should come too, huh? The boys with the toys.
Yes, this is true. And I believe what I'm seeing now, I count it as a miracle, because European politics has been shaken and reversed 180 degrees within the last couple of weeks. And it's not that the previous years were like totally in the fog. I believe at least portion of your political class understood what's going on, but I can explain it in another simple way. That when the Berlin Wall collapsed in 1989, and when the Velvet Revolution's taken place in a couple of countries in Central Europe, everybody was expecting that now, because the Berlin Wall falls, and because the Cold War stops, and the globe will be more united and more integrated, the democratic rules and democratic attitudes will go further east. But even if this was true, at least for Ukraine, it was in big portion true, the corruption from the Soviet system went west and met another portion of corruption which was already there. And they started to make alliances, and they started to make all these offshore economical things, which actually at certain point blown up to such a proportion that they started to take to the question mark the security and the basic of economy in many European countries. And sometimes I was asking myself back in the early 2010, how could you be so blind? How could you be so self-sure that you think that nothing bad actually will happen? And what if you will experience the same threats that we experience? Because I remember that Ukrainians for the first time were exposed as unreliable partners back in 2005 in January, when the gas from Russia stopped to be pumped into our transfer system. And because of that, we also probably would have to stop, transfer it further to Europe. But Ukraine also has big areas of gas deposits. So we gather gas underground, and then we send it in portion to the West. So because of these deposits, we were able to still serve as partners for European needs in energy supplies, but we were in big problem, and we were shouting about this problem. And Russia has accused Ukrainian government that it is a theft, that we are stealing Russian gas instead of pumping it in European gas lines. and gas pipes. And that was the first moment for me when the bell ringed, and I understood that things go very tough and the reputation of Ukraine now is at stake, but actually something else is at stake. And you have to know that the Nord Stream 1 was built exactly after this first reputational scandal of Ukraine as unreliable supplier or transfer. And the Nord Stream 2 has been agreed and started to be built when Russia already annexed Crimea.
Yeah, yeah. So this is very important what you're saying, because as I look at Ukraine in this, even when it became an independent nation, let's say in the 1991, it's hard to find what's actually happening in Ukraine with other, let's say, foundational moments in history. But so after 1989, you could say there were two strategies to install democracy in other countries. The one, that's just what you sketched, that is the economic strategy, that you could say neoliberal. So you trust on economic integration, not without reason, because it worked in the western part of in Europe, of course. And so this is one strategy. And the other strategy was this installing it by violence and force. And it happened in Iraq, it happened in Afghanistan, and it also failed. But in Ukraine, we are actually watching since, let's say, 1991, 2004, 2014, a very different part, which is, unless the other two, a political part. So Ukraine is creating a democracy by going in a democratic way. So not by economy, not by force, but developing the step by step, the democratic institutions, what I need. So in that sense, I think, and I'm beginning to think about quite recently about this what is happening now in Ukraine already for a generation, I would say, is comparable what was happening in 1776 in the United States, the first independence war in a democratic war, or maybe the French Revolution, which is also different, but also is not a economic thing or whatever. It's a democratic thing. It's an institutional thing, and that makes you so special. So
I don't want to sound as I have some mania grandioso, but I really understand the situation which is now as a long revolution which has been taking place in Ukrainian society, first internally and now on the screens of the whole world, actually, because Ukrainians thought about democratic rules, about democratic fair play seriously from the start. We never have been suspicious about that as much as in Russia. We never have been cynical about that. And we never thought to withdraw from politics or to say, for example, that culture is not political, or, I don't know, sport is not political. We would politics is very dirty and we would not take part in it. I believe there were stages in this, but there were some turning points when the moral forces in the society were somehow whispering, this is our responsibility. If not we, then who? If not now, then when? Democracy now is hacked. It is about to be cruelly crushed. That's why we have to go out to the squares, to the streets of our cities, and we have to show what the direct democracy actually is about, because vox populi, vox dei. And when, for example, elections were stolen, as in 2004, or when the important journalist has been beheaded, and the signal to the society from this cruelty and cynicism was there will be no independent journalism in Ukraine whatsoever. or probably there will be no independent journalism in the post-Soviet area whatsoever. So when Grigory Vangadze was killed in this brutal way, Ukrainians were just, how would you call it? It was a grave offense to the society that something like this could happen, and that's why people were so determined to find the criminals who did it, to punish them, to take them to court, and to get back to the real democracy with real journalism as a force power. And we could say that there were several waves of interrupted revolutions in Ukraine. And they were interrupted because we were living in something like, I explain it like Russian matryoshka, Russian doll, when you have this smaller one, but the smaller one is in the bigger one, and the bigger in the even bigger, and then the biggest. So we were knocking the first part, but there was another matryoshka. We knocked the other one, but there was a bigger one. And finally, we knocked something which was just grave offense to Putin idea of the Russian Empire to be reinstalled, or the Soviet Union to be saved in some different shape and name. And Ukrainians were always serious about dissolution of Soviet Union, but it seems like Russians were only waiting for it to reinstalled.
Yeah. I want to go back to with two questions again for with your poetry. The first is the first poem you read. So you read the second poem, the last two poems. You said, okay, these are already about the culture wars, but we didn't talk about the first one yet. So could you say something about this one?
Yeah, it comes from the very beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict in Donbass, somewhere in May 2014, I believe. And for me, at that moment, it was some people in my circle, some people in Ukrainian cultural milieu, in Ukrainian academia, they tend to think that maybe Russia will stop where it is. Maybe it's really something about Russian-speaking population in Ukraine, and after all, they like Putin and they want to live with him in one house. Why not to let them go? But even back then, I understood in some part of my consciousness and historical comprehension that this is just a pretext, and it will not stop anywhere soon and anywhere close to any border of Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, because this Russian-speaking part actually is fluctuating, and there are Russian-speaking cities in Ukrainian ocean, and there are towns which are half and half, and there are villages which probably speak, we call it Surzhyk, a mixture between Russian and Ukrainian, but it does not make them Russian thinking. Even they are Russian speaking, they are not Russian thinking. And I was just positively shocked by a small boy, I believe of 10 or 11 years old, in Odessa, back in 2014, in May, standing on the street protest with a small slogan, and the slogan reads like that: "We will not speak freely when Putin comes. We will be subjected to keep silence in Russian." So even this young boy, he understood that the question of language, it's just a manipulation. And the whole clash between Russia and Ukraine is a clash of worldview and a clash of the visions of the future. Because Ukrainian future was absolutely opposite. It was alternative to the future which Russian elite already figured out and signed out for, or designated for us.
So wouldn't you say, on the other hand, that so you are a Ukrainian poet. So you are a poet from this generation, which came into being after 1991. So
It's true.
yeah, there are some. There are a lot of you, not the same, of course, but there are a lot of you who are really, really very good, I think. And but your poetry is in Ukrainian, and as I look at Ukrainian and as a language, it's very much connected to the development of Ukraine as a nation. So, do you consider yourself as an maybe a stupid question, a Ukrainian poet, so to say?
Yes, I think this is true. It's a bit a question because I understand fully that you can be Canadian and not speaking particular Canadian language. You speak either English or French or probably some other language of your country of heritage. But at the same time, you know, with Ukraine, we are more, how would you call it, autochthonous. So for generations, of course, some of us were going away and starting new lives somewhere else in the world, but many also were preserving our roots and staying together with our tradition and our land. And it was in generations. And when you think that part of Ukraine was within Austria-Hungary, the Habsburg Empire. Part of Ukraine was in Russian Empire. And before that, part of Ukraine was in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And before that, there was Kievan Rus, but also there was Galician Rus. So I now represent this more western part of Ukraine. And all these parts were pieces in somebody else's big geopolitical projects, but the language was very the same, and it was the glue. It was a social platform on which culture could be, even when splitted, in a way united. And if you think about 19th century, of course, it's a modern phase of the language. It's a little bit different language than before, but still it's interesting that in Russian Empire, Ukrainian language was legally forbidden. So there were a couple of decrees since Catherine the Great, and then almost every couple of years, there were some decrees which regulated, were shrinking, and then we're just forbidding to publish in Ukrainian, to teach in Ukrainian, to sing in Ukrainian, to have theater performances in Ukrainian, and most of all, to have religious services in Ukrainian. And when you think of that, then every next generation of literary figures, of poets, of writers, they had to fight the negative reality that their language is prone to extinction, that they actually should not be Ukrainian writers, but to switch to Russian. But some of them didn't, like Taras Shevchenko. He was born as a serf, but he was born a serf just second generation. And for example, his father was a serf, but his mother was married into the serfage. So she herself was a free woman who felt in love so strongly that she sacrificed her freedom for the chance to be married to the man he loved.
Beautiful.
And Shevchenko had grandfather who was Ukrainian Cossack, and who had this notion of Ukrainian freedom and fight and resilience and ability to take decisions, not to take the fate. And because of that, Shevchenko himself also did not took the fate, and she in a way rebelled against it. And because of his talent and gift, he was bought out of serfdom at the age of 25 and started a career as a painter and graphic. But for his poetry, which was poetry of political meaning and of satirical flavor, he actually was accused of anti-Tsarist, anti-Russian rhetoric, has been jailed, and has been put to the to the soldier service somewhere in what is now Kazakhstan, nearby Aral. So it was a grave punishment already. But you have to know that Shevchenko, on the top of this, was forbidden to write and to draw. So he was gifted writer and drawer. And he was forbidden to do both his creative professions, to do both his creative vocations. So if you think about this human humiliation and this, I don't know how to call it, this cruelty, which is inflicted upon you, then you will understand the level and the capacity of rebellion which was inside Shevchenko. And Shevchenko told to his readers in his autobiography that my own fate is in many ways like the fate of my people. So he was thinking of himself as only a one small drop of a sea, and the sea was Ukrainian sea, and he was just one drop. But he left some very important poetic formula, poetic stanza, which were important and were learned by heart by the next generations of Ukrainians. And you can think of Shevchenko as prophetic poet, but no, I don't want to say he was prophetic. I want to say Russians were lazy in their effort to de-imperialize. If Russians would be changed within these 150 years, then Shevchenko will be just outdated, antique 19th century, somebody who barely known and probably even don't studied so much in school program or university program. But because now he is as acute and as actual as he was in 19th century, there is no better diagnosis for Russian imperialism than Shevchenko himself already dropped and penned. And it's interesting that he had many friends, including among Russian elites. And some of the Russian elites were of Ukrainian origin. And there is also this bitter story of Ukrainian aristocracy who betrayed its own people and went and bowed to Russian Tsar authority and lost the touch with its own culture and its own language as well. And there were those peasants who were very often illiterate, but they did not cut ties with their own culture and their own language. And they were this reservoir in positive way of this culture to resurrect and rejuvenate in next generations. And it was very often that every next generation of Ukrainian writers thought of themselves as the last one. And they thought of their readers as last who will read and understand Ukrainian. So the language itself and the culture was on the brink of extinction for many, many decades. But still we are here, and we now allowed, as not many centuries before, we go Irish, and the rest of the world somehow hear what we do.
That's maybe something what I hear when I hear you reading your poetry in Ukraine, that there is something proud in it, so to say. So this took a real effort, the language, Ukraine, to survive and to become an official language of a nation. So you are more or less the generation of poets who finalizes this emancipation of the Ukrainian as a language and Ukraine as a nation. And so this, for me, this is very much connected. This working with Ukraine, this talking in Ukraine, this, I think, this proudness, what I'm reading in it, and actually what you all just in this hour are explaining what's behind your poetry. So these are for me so connected. I have just one question, and then we have to stop, and it's about the title of your book, A Field of Foundlings. I've been thinking about this, and I couldn't quite figure out why it has this title. Is it your poems who are the foundlings, or are you referring to something else? So Why Foundlings and why a feel of Foundlings?
Yeah, I think this is a metaphor for Ukraine and for Ukrainian offsprings of many generations, which were sometimes literally orphans because of the two world wars, and probably their fathers and other elder relatives were killed there, or or just disappeared there, never have been found. Because of this atrocity of the Holodomor, we have been speaking a couple of minutes earlier, where many young children were actually left orphans and probably were raised in somebody else's family or in orphanages. We also can think about those whose fathers and sometimes mothers perished in Stalin repressions, because repressions were targeted particularly against cultural elites, but also educational elites. It means that children of university teachers, school teachers, particularly historians and philologists, like literary scholars and language scholars, these were targeted heavily, unproportionally. And all these people were like self-made, self-raised in a way, but they managed, and they not only survived, but they prosper. They were able to create a strong link with the whole tradition, which was not naturally and taken for granted, but it was a real consciousness effort to find your parents or to find your grannies, to establish this longer generational and cultural link into the history, into the depth and richness of Ukrainian culture, probably way back to Enlightenment time, probably way back to Baroque time, probably way back to the old Kievan Rus as well. So from one side, we were deprived of this heritage. It was not possible in the Soviet time to say that Kiev is a heir of Kievan Rus. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, it was so obvious that Kiev is a city. It is on the same place. Sofia, the great cathedral, is at the same place. Yaroslav Mudry, the great prince, is buried here, and his grannies and his offsprings are all buried here. So actually, it has been taking place here. So why do you think of Moscow when you name Kiev Rus? But for Ukrainians, it was not possible even to start talking about this heritage. So because of that, I believe this field of foundlings is Ukraine being from one side a big orphanage, but from the other side, and I insist on that, being a deposit of a new source of energy and a source of development. And this source of development is human creativity, is human ingenious. And what I see now, we are very smart. We are outsmarting our enemy, and I believe we will win this war.
And you are not only outsmarting your enemy, but you're also very much impressing your friends. So that's actually true. And I think, of course, I know Ukraine already for a long time, but when I look around and people who don't know Ukraine, they are really amazed what you achieve. And they think, well, they are amazed by your military efforts, which you play, your resilience at the front, that Putin didn't succeed in taking Ukraine in 3 days, like in a blitz, but they should be impressed by much more that Ukraine is, and you represent for me that what much more Ukraine is. So
yeah. I believe we accelerated our adulthood. We were quite infantile. We were a young nation in a way, if you think about political independence only since 1991. But we grew adult very fast. And if you allow me, I will finish with another poetry. And thank you very much for your attention.
Of course.
And then they grow up, children with the eyes of adults, recognizing newcomers by their accents, like herbs by scents, shaving forelocks from untamed hair, rounding their heads bare, and snagging moles of fear. The faculties of love and death don't run for the hills. They draw inspiration from the hidden drawer of hope. They bring children to a world, a tight piece of dough, and think to the cradle, what shall I do with you? Every year adds a centimeter. The blood freed in their veins bubbles and boils. At first they will live eternally, then bury their dead, and tired of childhood, indeed, grow up.